It's a question really that each individual who has gone on before us has had to answer for him or herself, haven't they? And it would seem that perhaps in past generations, that perhaps more people generally agreed upon the answer to this question. And I think we know perhaps what that answer was in the past generations, don't we? In years gone by, people almost unassumingly accepted the existence of God and the presence of a higher spiritual authority. This nation and many nations of the world were founded by men and women who were God-believing people. But if we fast forward to our time, to the year 2015, with all the world issues that we see facing us and going on around us, and we see the misdirection of power and of politics, the abundance of wealth in areas that are not necessarily needed, and in areas where they are needed there isn't any wealth, the misfortune that we see, and all the many issues that go on around us, we might be left wondering, where exactly is this world heading for, and who exactly is in control of it? Does God still exist, as the screen says, ladies and gentlemen, in 2015? Does God even exist? Has God ever existed? Well, these are the sorts of questions that we hope to take a look at tonight, and that we hope to find some explanation of. And by extension, we want to see what it is that we can find out about this world that seemingly finds itself aimlessly going down the world timeline with no apparent end in sight. Now, for many people, the question really isn't, does God still exist, but more pointedly, did God ever exist? Now, there have always been proponents of atheistic thought, but perhaps the largest and most popular champion of this sort of thinking is the theory of evolution. The origins of evolution date back farther than we may expect, even to the time of the Greek philosophers. But as we know, the theory really took root in the work that Charles Darwin wrote when he published the work on the origin of species in 1859. And since then, as we know, the scientific community has become a huge advocate of evolutionary theory and has promulgated it in its teaching throughout the vast reaches of society. If not just our society, but all societies of the world. Now, the reason, or one of the reasons, why evolution is pertinent to our discussion tonight is because it stands as the other side, or it stands as the opposition within the context of discussing the existence of God. Evolution, along with the Big Bang Theory, teaches that the universe and life within the universe began of its own accord with no divine intervention, and that life forms have since then continued to evolve slowly over time into what we see today, into what we are today. And so, as a result, God is essentially nixed from the equation, along with any creationistic viewpoints that come from holy writings such as the Bible. But we stop and ask ourselves, is evolution actually correct? Is it true? Is it actually correct in its rendering of why we are here and why the world is as it is? Is it a good enough theory to do such a shocking thing as to replace divinity and to replace deity? Well, what I would like us to do for a few moments is to review a handful of ideas that I think each of us know, perhaps not necessarily by name or in specific, but that lend some support to answering our question about God's existence. Reviewing those things that we know, but that we perhaps haven't dealt with in any recent time, will no doubt provide, at the very least, some perspective that may for a while been absent in our thinking. Does God exist? It's interesting because men and women of logic have throughout the years established many arguments of reason that provide evidence of God's existence. And really tonight are three arguments in particular that we want to highlight. Some of which, as you see, might have long and funny names, but that really do make a lot of sense from a logical standpoint, as we'll come to see. And so we'll jump into the first one here, this first argument of logic and reason, the teleological argument. Now, the teleological argument, as you see up on the screen, is an argument for the existence of an intelligent creator based on perceived evidence of deliberate design in the natural and physical world. Now, this law of science essentially means that when an object reflects a purpose or a goal or a design, it must have, therefore, some designer of it. Simply put, things do not design themselves. I think it's something that we can probably relate with. This line of reasoning is naturally invoked when considering the creation of the world and of the universe, isn't it? Now, some of you may have heard of the watchmaker analogy. And it's an analogy used by many adherents of natural theology, but popularized by William Paley. Alistair McGrath wrote a book entitled Darwinism and the Divine, Evolutionary Thought and Natural Theology. He summarizes Paley's point by writing this regarding the watchmaker analogy. As you see up on the screen, the same complexity and utility evident in the design and functioning of a watch can also be discerned in the natural world. Each feature of a biological organism, like that of a watch, showed evidence of being designed in such a way as to adapt the organism to survival within its environment. Complexity and utility are observed. The conclusion that they were designed and constructed by God, Paley holds, is as natural as it is correct. And so what we want to do is just take a look at a few examples of this idea of deliberate design. There are three deliberate design concepts that we're just going to take a look at quickly here. And the first one is this idea of irreducible complexity. Now, the term irreducible complexity was introduced by biochemist Michael Behe in 1996 in a book entitled Darwin's Black Box. Now, Mr. Behe defines it as a single system which is composed of several well-matched interacting parts that contribute to the basic function, wherein the removal of any one of those parts causes the system to effectively cease functioning. Behe uses the analogy of a mousetrap to illustrate this concept. A mousetrap consists of several different components. It has the base, the catch, the spring, and the hammer, all of which must be in place for the mousetrap to actually work. And so removal of any one of those pieces is going to negate the function of the mousetrap. And so we have then illustrated this idea of irreducible complexity, that all parts have to work together in order to have the entire process working as one. Now, another concept that has to do with this idea of deliberate design is this idea of specified complexity. And so in 1986, Charles Thaxton, who was a physical chemist and a creationist, used the term specified complexity from information theory when claiming that messages transmitted from DNA in the cell were specified by intelligence and must have originated with an intelligent agent. The intelligent design concept of specified complexity was developed in the 1990s by mathematician and philosopher and theologian William Dembski. And so this is what Dembski states, that when something exhibits specified complexity, that is, it's both complex and specific simultaneously, one can infer that it was produced by intelligent cause, or that is, that it was designed rather than being the result of natural processes. And so he provides the following example. He says, a single letter of the alphabet is specified without being complex. A long sentence of random letters is complex but not specified. He goes on to say, a Shakespearean sonnet is both complex and specified. And so he states that details of living things can be similarly characterized, especially the patterns of molecular sequences in functional biological molecules such as DNA. Dembski defines complex specified information, or CSI, as anything with less than 1 in 150th chance of occurring by natural chance. And so we see then from that illustration this idea of specified complexity, where both components are necessary to create the CSI, or the complex specified information. One thing might be specific but not complex, and one thing might be complex but not specific, as in the example of the letter of the alphabet in a sentence. But you take a sonnet of Shakespeare, and it's both specific and complex. And we relate that then to the molecular structure of DNA, which falls under this category of specified complexity. It's something that, as he said, and as we stated, is something that has less than a 1 in 10 to the 150th chance of occurring by natural chance. And just the last idea of deliberate design is this idea of a fine-tuned universe. And really, it's an appeal to the broader teleological argument outside of biology. Most notably, an argument based on the fine-tuning of universal constants that make matter and life possible, and which are argued not to be solely attributable to chance. And so these include the values of fundamental physical constants, the relative strength of nuclear forces, electromagnetism, and gravity between fundamental particles, as well as the ratios of masses of such particles. And so intelligent design proponent and Center for Science and Culture fellow Guillermo Gonzalez argues that if any of these values were even slightly different, the universe would be dramatically different, making it impossible for many chemical elements and features of the universe, such as galaxies, to form. Thus, proponents argue an intelligent designer of life was needed to ensure that the requisite features were present to achieve that particular outcome. And I think this is something that, again, we can see through the physical world around us. That everything from the complexity of the anatomy of our bodies to the nature around us and the plants, as well as in the universe around us, everything is so finely tuned that it works together. And it's something that must imply a designer. The teleological argument reminds me of those words that we find in Psalm 19, where we read, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. The sun rises at one end of the heavens and makes its circuit to the other." And so we have then, just in brief, some ideas regarding this teleological argument, or logical evidence about this idea of deliberate design. And so we move then to the second piece of logical evidence that we want to take a look at tonight, this idea of a cosmological argument. And as you see up on the screen, what we read is that it's an argument in which the existence of God is deduced or inferred as highly probable from facts concerning causation, change, motion, contingency, or finitude in respect of the universe as a whole or processes within it. Now, it's a lot of words, I understand, up on the screen, describing what we know more simply as the law of cause and effect. This law of science states that every cause has its effect, and every effect has its cause, and is therefore a fundamental law to all scientific thought and study. The cosmological argument is also traditionally known as an argument from universal causation. It's also known as an argument from first cause. It's also known as the causal argument, or the argument from existence. And so, as the name implies, or as these other names implies, it's a line of reasoning that has everything to do with first cause. And therefore, it bears importance to the question of where or how the existence of the universe came into being. You see, we see a lot of effects around us, don't we? We see the sun, we see the moon, we see the stars, we see the birds and the plants around us. We see all of these effects around us. But to whom or to what is credited the cause of all of this? And so can we see how this law must bear relationship to the origin of the earth and of the universe? And scientists do agree that the universe and the earth hasn't actually existed forever, but that it had a beginning at some point. Scientists agree on this. Well, the question then is, who caused all of what we see now to actually come into being back in the beginning? See, the universe is defined by the theory of relativity as time is defined as space, as matter, and physical energy. And all of those have a beginning. That's what scientists say. That is, none of these components of our universe have always existed. They came into being at some point. And so this means that if the universe had a starting point in history, then it obviously began to exist, and it must have a cause for its existence. If the universe needs a cause for its coming into being, then that cause must be beyond the universe. Or in other words, a cause that is something beyond time. It's a cause that's something beyond space, beyond matter, and beyond physical energy. Those are the things that define the universe, aren't they? Those things right there. And so the cause of those things, of the universe, must be beyond that. And those are the things that scientists agree were created at some point, that we know came into being at a certain point and that define the universe. And so the logic of the argument says that the thing that caused time and space and matter and physical energy to come into existence must be something, absolutely must be something that is not itself governed or composed by those very same things: time, space, matter, and physical energy. And so, what was or is that cause, ladies and gentlemen? Well, in an article entitled God vs. Science, found in the November 13th issue of Time magazine, profound atheist Richard Dawkins was posed with that very same question. And he answered it by stating, there could be something incredibly grand and incomprehensible and beyond our present understanding. That was his statement in response to, well, what is the cause of the universe? Well, ladies and gentlemen, the cosmological argument reminds me of those words found in Psalm 90 that you see up on the screen. And to me, answers the question. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. And so what we see up on the screen on the next slide is the cosmological argument summarized as it relates to evidence of God's existence. And so number one, we read, whatever begins to exist must have a cause for its existence. Number two, the universe began to exist. That is time, space, matter, and physical energy. Number three, therefore the universe must have a cause for its existence, according to this argument. Number four, the attributes of the cause of the universe, being timeless, existing outside of space, and so on, are the attributes of God. If God is the cause of the universe, He is without time, He is without space, and so on. So number five, therefore the cause of the universe must be God. Alright, just getting into the third logical piece of evidence that we wanted to take a look at tonight. You'll see up on the screen, it's called the moral argument. It's maybe something that perhaps we can relate to a bit more. You see, every culture throughout history has had some form of law. Similarly, every culture has had some sense of right and wrong. For example, murdering and lying and stealing and immorality are almost completely and universally rejected in most societies. People ultimately cherish and appreciate ideals such as love and such as truth and justice. But where did and do these ideals come from? Where do these laws come from? Where does right versus wrong actually come from? Well, in a world developed via evolutionary theory, only, as we know, the fittest survive. And as such, what we find is that the fittest do not waste their time and energy on those things or those people who jeopardize their survival. And so why, in only the fittest, in a fittest survived world, would someone stop to support the weak, or stop to support the blind, or the mentally handicapped in the way that we find people actually doing today? The fittest do not concern themselves with these sorts of individuals because they only serve to hinder and to not aid, according to this perception. A purposeless, amoral universe does not develop attributes of conscience like love and truth and guilt and shame. It's interesting because evolutionists say that love is a mechanical thing, based on the hormones that are in our bodies. But the love that is affected by our bodily hormones are those natural instincts that we know as maternal love and as sexual attraction. These are two attributes or two instincts that we share with the animals, and science shows this. But how does the evolutionist explain the sacrificial love that many people demonstrate to one another, even strangers? A love which involves giving up of time, of money, of resources, even of life itself to help those less fortunate than themselves, just to make the other person better off or happy. So yes, the evolutionist allows that at times it may be more efficient for one member of the population to die in order to save the majority, as we see when a bee stings a bear who might be attacking the nest. You see, that seems to make sense. Suffering harm for your friends, if it will help your friends. But what, ladies and gentlemen, about those who suffer harm or even suffer the loss of life for people they don't even know? or even more so for people that might be their enemy. You see, it's a sort of unnatural love that reminds me of those words that we find in Exodus chapter 23. We read here, "If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall surely bring it back to him again. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying under its burden, and you would refrain from helping it, you shall surely help him in it." See, there's no natural part of our physical makeup that can explain that sort of behavior. There's no hormone that exists in our body that causes people to love like that. Because if there is, I'm sure we'd all like to have a bit more of that hormone, wouldn't we? You see, the argument of morality, or the moral argument, ladies and gentlemen, is one that attributes this phenomenon, this peculiar way in which men and women have found themselves governed by law and order, a law and order outside of our own instinctual habits, as being only attributable to a higher being. And therefore it's evidence in support of a deity, isn't it? So thus far, what we've done is spent the majority of our time focusing or examining our thoughts on a few different logical arguments that reasonably show that a higher being must exist. Our primary objective is, of course, to answer the question of, does God still exist? And I think so far we've seen that it is reasonable to believe that God does exist, through those three items that we already took a look at. But the question yet to be answered is God still active, and is he still involved in the world that he created? Well, in order perhaps to shed some light on the present working of God in the world around us, what I think we need to do is turn our attention to how we can come to trust that ancient writing that we know to be the Bible. You see, if we believe that God does exist, and that he did create the universe and you and I, it would seem reasonable that he also has a plan for you and I, and a plan for the world that you and I live in. See, it all hasn't been created in vain. You and I haven't been created in vain. Or at least that wouldn't make much reasonable sense if we were, or if the world were. What we would like to show you is that the Bible actually does have answers to these questions of what God is going to do with the world, both in the present and in the future. But the only thing is we need to come, first of all, to trust what we read in the Bible, that it's actually a holy writ of God. And this is what we hope to try and demonstrate, to try and find some trust in this writing. And secondly, we want to try and find how it is actually a reliable resource. And thirdly, a book wherein we may find answers pertaining to the future. Now, how will we actually do that? How can we do that? Well, we start by using secular evidence that validates biblical accounts, that validate biblical characters and places and names. And so we therefore turn to archaeology, or biblical archaeology. Then after that, in an effort to develop our trust in a still active God, we examine biblical prophecy to see whether or not those things God says or said actually pan out, and use this as an indicator of whether further belief and trust is warranted. So we turn first then to biblical archaeology. And as you see up on the screen, we read the historical narrative of the Bible is validated by ongoing archaeological explorations. The Bible isn't just historical fables. The biblical narrative details very precisely the accounts of real places and real people, all validated by secular history and archaeological finds. So there's just a handful of various archaeological finds that we actually want to take a look at that go to support this claim of validating the scriptures of the Bible. The first is this piece of archaeology that is, as you see up on the screen, has to do with the house of David. There's an inscription. And so, what was found is this inscription on this piece of stone that refers to the house of David. The discovery provides an archaeological connection to the biblical references of the ruling dynasty established by King David, approximately 2 centuries before the events that are mentioned in the actual inscription. The events of the inscription surround the victorious war fought by Hazael of Aram as he defeated Jehoram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah. These are events that are hundreds of years after the actual reign of King David. But the archaeological find shows that that David's dynasty or house, as we read in the Bible, lived on past his time. And so it's the first mention of King David. It's the earliest mention of a biblical figure outside of the Bible. The discovery is of particular importance in the face of those scholars who were either skeptical or denied the historical existence of King David. Just another piece that was found is the Cyrus cylinder, as we see up on the screen. It's a clay cylinder inscribed in Babylonian cuneiform by Cyrus, king of Persia, who lived in 559 BC. So the cylinder tells us of the account of Cyrus and his conquest of Babylon in 539 BC and his capture of the last king of Babylon. And really, as we'll come to see, and as you may come to see if you were to read the Bible, it's the exact same narrative that we read in the Bible, and that's foretold in the biblical account by the prophet Isaiah, and then later mentioned as it came to pass in real time. There's been a number of seals that have been unearthed as well in the archaeological digs, and this one in particular is interesting. This bula or seal was without a doubt the impression of Baruch the son of Neriah, who lived contemporarily with Jeremiah, a famous prophet in biblical Israel. This particular scribe, Baruch, served as the personal scribe to Jeremiah, writing the dictation of the prophet. And what we see in the translation of the actual seal is what you see here. We read, belonging to Baruch, son of Neriah the scribe. And so we have, again, an individual of the biblical narrative who has been confirmed or validated through a secular archaeological find. Another interesting one is this inscription of Pontius Pilate, who I'm sure many of us know through our reading of the Bible. And what we see is that it's a limestone block that was part of a larger dedication to Tiberius Caesar, but that has inscribed on it the words Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea. So this is the only known occurrence of Pontius Pilate in any ancient inscription. And it was discovered in Caesarea, Israel in 1961. And previous to this, many critics questioned the actual existence of a Roman governor or prefect with the name Pontius Pilate. But this proves that he did exist, and that he did order the crucifixion of Jesus, as the biblical narrative describes. And so we see what the translation of the inscription is up on the screen. Now the last piece of biblical archaeology that we want to take a look at, before we move on, are the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now the Dead Sea Scrolls were those scrolls that were recovered and that show a complete copy or portions of all the books in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, except for the book of Esther. And what was discovered is that these texts are older by at least 1,000 years than any other previous biblical text written in Hebrew that had been discovered previously, and that were used to translate the Bible from Hebrew to English. And so what they went on to become was a window into the textual history and accuracy of the Old Testament scriptures. The scrolls were found near the Dead Sea in Qumran, Israel, in 1947 by Bedouin shepherds. And what you see on the right-hand side of the screen is a picture of the great Isaiah scroll, which is dated at about 100 BC and is the oldest copy of the book of Isaiah to exist. Previously, the Codex Leningrad, dated at 1000 AD, was the oldest known copy of the Hebrew Bible, including Isaiah. And so we have 100 BC compared to 100 AD in the discovery of these Dead Sea Scrolls. And so why is this important to know? Well, the Bible that we have today and that we are freely able to read from is nearly identical to the accounts and the facts and the characters and figures found within these scrolls that were found just within the last 100 years, but that date farther back than any other text previously used for translating and giving us a textually accurate Bible. And so biblical archaeology continues to validate the narrative scriptures, ladies and gentlemen. The examples that we looked at here are only a few. There are hundreds more that prove the very same thing, that the book that we know to be the Bible, it is accurate, it is reliable in its translation, and it hasn't been altered or tampered with, and that it can be trusted for its correctness. But beyond that, beyond the reliability and the correctness of the text, can we actually trust the message of the Bible? Is the actual message of the book credible and actually from God? It may be accurate in its rendering from ancient times to now, but is it actually credible, and is it worth listening to? We want to believe that we can, because we want to believe that God himself had it written for each of our benefits. But how can we trust that message is from God himself? Well, there is, ladies and gentlemen, one magnificent way in which we can find credibility in the message of God found in the Bible. And it's by looking to see whether or not what God has said he would do has actually been performed and completed. And so what we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen, is prophecy. See, humans are unable to foretell the future. They can unearth the past, they can keep us up to date on the ever-changing things that are going on in the world around us, but no one has ever managed to consistently predict accurately what will come in years to come. See, this is where the Bible is different, ladies and gentlemen. God, who is the author of the Scriptures, challenges us by saying what will happen even many centuries before it actually comes to pass. You see, foretelling the future is a hallmark of deity. It is what gives 100% proof to who God says he is. We read, the Bible, with all its fulfilled prophecies, proves the existence of God. Telling the future is a hallmark of deity. It's what sets God apart from man and what allows us to trust and believe in him. It reminds me of the passage in Deuteronomy 18 where we read, how can we know when a message has been spoken by the Lord? If what a prophet proclaims in the name of the Lord does not take place or come true, that is a message that the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken presumptuously, so do not be alarmed. And so what we have here in the Bible itself is a test of a true prophet. And it's laid out by God himself, isn't it? But here's the thing. If God is the one who created this test of a true prophet, then the test must also apply to himself, shouldn't it? As well, since he too makes prophetical claims. See, we read in the book of Isaiah, which we saw is a book of the Bible validated by the Dead Sea Scrolls. We read this. God says, I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is still to come. I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. So this claim of God that we read of in the book of Isaiah, does it stand the test of time? Well, we just want to consider two examples. The first example that we want to take a look at is one that perhaps you'll remember from your history classes. And it has to do with the ancient city of Tyre. You see, Tyre's destruction was prophesied in the Bible, in the book of Ezekiel. Tyre was going to suffer the judgments from God due to their mistreatment of the nation of Israel. And we find that Ezekiel chapter 26 outlines what the details of this judgment were going to look like. There's 5 aspects listed up on the screen. We read from Ezekiel 26 in list format that many nations would come up against Tyre. We also find that the inhabitants of the villages and fields of Tyre would be slain. We read that one person in particular, Nebuchadnezzar, would build a siege mound against the city. The city would be broken down, and the stones, timber, and soil would be thrown into the midst of the water. And lastly, the city would become a place for spreading nets. And number 6 as well, the city would never be rebuilt. What we find, interestingly enough, as it relates to biblical prophecy, is that this was prophesied well in advance to when this actually took place. We see, when we read about number 3 there, Nebuchadnezzar coming to build a siege mound against the city and destroying the city, that happened in 570 BC, well before the time of Ezekiel. But in addition to this, we find that this prophecy in particular had 2 actual fulfillments. We see that we can break it down. The number 3 there, when Nebuchadnezzar comes against the city, does actually happen. But number 4, where we read about the city being broken down and the stones, timber, and soil being thrown into the midst of the sea, that aspect did not actually happen when Nebuchadnezzar came up against Tyre. He didn't actually throw the city into the sea. And so we might ask ourselves, well, maybe this is a false prophecy. Maybe what was spoken about here is too much detail and didn't actually come to pass. What we find out from our historical record and from our history books is that later on, in 332 BC, Alexander the Great came and fought against the city of Tyre and actually fulfilled what the rest of the prophecy went on to state. What we find, and as you see in the picture up on the screen, Tyre was composed of the mainland city as well as an island city as well. And such that when Alexander the Great came to put a siege against the city, the people departed the mainland and went out into the island portion of the city. And what Alexander the Great actually did was a fulfillment of the prophecy where he scraped the stones, the timber, and the ruin from the mainland portion of the city, threw it into the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, as you see there up on the screen, built a causeway that he could take himself and his army over to the city and destroy it. And so we see, ladies and gentlemen, the accurateness of the prophecy in Ezekiel chapter 26, both in its partial fulfillment under Nebuchadnezzar and its complete fulfillment under Alexander the Great. Now, there's plenty of prophecies in the scriptures that fall within this realm, or within this idea of being fulfilled. And we don't have time to take a look at all of them, but there's one other that I wanted to take a look at because it bears relevance to our time now. And it has to do with the nation of Israel. Because the nation of Israel, in all of its varied existence, stands as one of the most tremendous proofs that God does exist and that God is continuing to work in our world. See, God has forever been working with the nation of Israel through their shortcomings and through their successes. And if that all of these shortcomings and successes have been detailed in the biblical narrative. What we find, ladies and gentlemen, is that the nation of Israel continues to exist because God continues to work with them. He has a plan and a purpose with the nation of Israel, and by extension, you and I. We read in the book of Isaiah, once again, in Isaiah chapter 30, "Now go, write it before them on a tablet, and note it on a scroll, that it may be for a time to come, forever and ever, that this is a rebellious people," in reference to Israel. But what we go on to read is that, "Therefore the Lord will wait, that he may be gracious to you, to Israel, and therefore he will be exalted, that he may have mercy on you. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all those who wait for him. For the people shall dwell in Zion at Jerusalem. You shall weep no more. He will be very gracious to you at the sound of your cry. When he hears it, he will answer you." What we want to detail in this particular passage, and there's many passages in Scripture that are of this effect, is this idea of Israel being a rebellious people who were scattered from their nation, which the historical books, our history books, prove, but that were later on regathered. And that's what this passage goes on to say. That the people would come back to Jerusalem, as the latter portion of that verse goes on to say. And that there would be, once again, a nation of Israel dwelling within its borders. It's a prophecy that was foretold in both its start and its completion in the Bible. See, Israel is yet in the hand of God and proves to all the world that God is still working out the plan he laid out from the very beginning. As long as Israel exists, so does the God of the Bible. The nation of Israel was scattered for thousands of years from the time of Christ, but according to the prophetic word, the nation has been reborn and exists today. And so what it tells us, ladies and gentlemen, is that God does exist, and not only that, but that he still exists now in 2015. The world is under the ultimate authority of God, and he is working out his plan and purpose with the earth. And what we want to offer to you, ladies and gentlemen, is hopefully that we've been able to perk your curiosity and your interest in the existence of God. And what we really want to do is be able to offer you some resources that will show you, well, what is God's purpose with this earth? And so we support and come from the Christadelphians of Royal Oak, and you'll see the website that's up on the screen where you can find more information. Because truly, God is in control of the world. He does exist, and he still exists. And His purpose with this earth will be fulfilled, and we want to be a part of that, don't we? And so I thank you for your attention tonight, and if you have any questions, we can talk later afterwards.